Good evening. My name is Rachel McMunn, and thank you all for coming here tonight. I have the pleasure of introducing WGBH's Callie Crossley, who is here tonight to have a discussion about media and politics. Callie is a broadcast journalist and the host of Under the Radar with Callie Crossley, which is a radio program that airs Sunday evenings from 6 to 7 p.m. on WGBH 89.7 FM, if you're interested in listening. Callie is also a public speaker and television and radio commentator for national and local programs, including CNN's Reliable Sources, the PBS NewsHour, and her weekly appearance on WGBH TV's Beat the Press, which examines local and national media coverage. Callie has 2 Harvard fellowships from the Mead Foundation for Journalism and the Institute for Politics at the John F. Kennedy School of Government. She also has earned a multitude of awards and recognitions for her work in her field, including an Oscar nomination, a National Emmy, and the Alfred I. DuPont Columbia Award for her work as producer of Eyes on the Prize, America's Civil Rights Series. Callie is highly regarded in her field, and we're lucky to have the privilege of speaking with her tonight. So without further ado, please join us in welcoming the one and only Callie Crossley.
Thank you so much. It's so nice to come to colleges and universities and get a lovely, lovely introduction. Some places I go, not so lovely, but that's lovely because they're not really looking for me. So here's what's going to happen. I'm going to make some opening remarks, just some observations about which you can fundamentally disagree or add your comments. And then I want to really engage in a discussion with you because I really don't know what might be most pressing on your mind to ask questions about. I don't even really know if I have the answers, but I have a lot of stories, so we can keep it going this way. A little bit tired tonight because I worked election night. I hadn't planned to, but I was at Wellesley College reporting in all night, so we can talk about that a little bit later if you wish. As you know, Wellesley is Hillary Clinton's alma mater, and it's also mine, so made a nice little connection there. So let me just talk about media, and if I had to frame, some of you are into framing, I know, because you're running for office. The entire look back on how the media did in covering this election campaign, I would say what we know now is it was all hidden in plain sight. That the evidence was all hidden in plain sight, what the real story was. But we used all kinds of tools of obfuscation, I can hardly say that word, and missed many points that added up to several large points that made for an entirely different story later on in the election eve. So let's start way back when you guys probably were not paying attention 2 years ago when this thing got started. And I would say, quoting Bay herself, the media was drunk in love with Donald Trump. Y'all got it. Okay. There was really nothing that he couldn't say that was not entertaining to people because he was utterly dismissed as a possible serious candidate. And so he also had celebrity. And I would call him a known unknown. You know, people thought they knew him, people in the media, because of his celebrity with The Apprentice. I mean, did you all ever watch The Apprentice? Okay, so, you saw him work there, and other folks knew him in other scenarios and knew the hotels and all of that. So here you have a situation where you have a celebrity, he's kind of a known guy, and he says he's running for president. Well, he said it 2 years ago, before he said it another time. Nobody's really taking him seriously. So anytime he felt like picking up the phone and calling in, which he did, I'm sure you all weren't paying attention, but he did it a lot. So on any given day, for those of us who really are engaged in media of all kinds, and by the way, let me be clear that when we use the word media, I'm talking very broadly, and that means that includes everything from the BBC, WGBH, and it also includes Maury Povich. That's media. That's the whole umbrella. And when we speak about journalism, there are certain tenets. I know people don't believe that, but rules that we follow, and that's a small subset of the entire media world. Okay, so now back to my story. So he's calling in on all kinds of media. He's calling in on morning TV shows, he's calling in on radio. He's just sort of weighing in on whatever may be on his mind. People got time to fill. They figured he's a fun guy to talk to, so they just talked to him. Well, what was the result of that? That every time he talked, he got more and more free media. And by the time somebody totaled up, and it wasn't even at the end of the campaign, how much free media that he had managed to accrue during this 2-year period of his sort of just checking in at all points or being available or tweeting. It was really about $2 billion in unearned media. In other words, if he had to pay for that, he would have paid $2 billion. That's how much time and space he got from everybody. And there's nobody's hands are clean on this. Everybody called him up. All the most serious people, all the fun people, everybody called him or took his calls whenever he wanted to do that. So the next thing that I would point out is that here he is in a situation where nobody's really taking him seriously, when the folks who are in the know, the pollsters, the veteran political reporters, the analysts who've been doing this forever, who really know how this works, it was all politics as usual. What do I mean by that? You know, you talk to somebody. I'm not a person that covers politics. I was never a political reporter. I talk about issues having to do with politics that intersect with politics. You know, I have covered political events in the past, but to be one steeped in it day in, day out, no, that's not me. I can name some people who are. All those people, then all of the wider circle of political operatives, the people who get paid to frame the messages, to figure out how to support various candidates, all said the same thing. There are certain things you need to know, little woman here, little person who's never, this is how it always goes. You know, so when you would say, as I did, to certain big folks, this doesn't seem right to me. It seems, why isn't this the way that it goes? And I'll give you a good example. I had the occasion to interview David Plouffe. Anybody know who he is? David Plouffe was one of the main architects of President Obama's 2 campaigns, winning campaigns. He now is the vice president for Uber, so you should know him. Okay? Because he's running your life. But anyway, David Plouffe, and in this election, he claimed that, no, I'm really not doing anything. I'm just sort of, every now and then I might check in, because, you know, was sort of my life for a long time. Well, let's just say he was the guy who, this is according to Politico, who told Joe Biden, not your time, Joe. You know, he took the tough job and said, you're not going to do it, Joe, you're not running this time. He also was the person that picked Robbie Mook, who is the campaign manager for Hillary Clinton. So I assess that as having a lot to say about this year's election, but he would claim not. But that's not my point. In this conversation, which was a wide-ranging one, and this was in August, just to frame it, so it wasn't a year and a half ago, it was in August, I said to him, you know, I'm looking at those rallies. I'm looking at people who attend those Trump rallies, and I have to say, there's a lot of really deep enthusiasm for people who are coming. Yeah, Callie, that's how it always goes. No. I'm looking at people driving hours to get to the rallies. Now, I know me. I'm not driving hours to get to the rally unless I'm really, really, really interested in this person. Or really, if not interested, intrigued by them or excited by them. Something is going to motivate me to get up off my couch and go. I'm the kind of person, I've got to bet that most of you are too. At this point, if the website doesn't load fast enough, we're done here. So now we're talking about people who have driven hours to go see this guy. And once they got there, they couldn't even get in, some of them. They're waiting hours to see him, over and over and over again. Now, do I think that his exaggerations about the media's not covering who's here, blah, 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 I think he was a little exaggerated in some occasions. But my point is about the intensity of the folks who are coming, no matter how many numbers actually were inside. But as I looked at them, most of them were fairly large. But let's just say he had a venue this size. There would be people hanging off the walls, standing outside. Okay, that says something to me, right? I said to David Plouffe, who knows? Shouldn't we evaluate that? Doesn't that mean these are people who were never interested before, who are excited about a candidate, who are going to vote for this candidate? Said to me, Callie, you don't know how it works. Politics as usual. People will go, they like the excitement, he's a celebrity, but people will not vote. These are not people who are going to vote. They're going to go, they're going to watch, they're going to listen, and they'll go home. I said, wow, That just seems weird to me. I asked for 2 or 3 other people of names that you would know who were supposed to be the big people. They told me the same thing. So there was too much accepting of politics as usual. Okay, let's talk about those polls. I mean, the polls were ridiculous. The polls, and I know, I'm just using me as an example. You shouldn't use yourself as an example because that's anecdotal. You know, you have to have scientific stuff. So just putting that on the table for all the people who know that and want you to know that. But just using yourself as a little bit of a measure. I lie on polls on the web. Come on, people. If someone calls me, I lie. On the web, I am a 70-year-old man who makes $35,000 a year. And I'm not black. So let's just work with that for a minute. Well, how do we think people answered pollsters to begin with? First of all, I think that even though polling has improved greatly and moved into the modern age to really reach people that they haven't reached before, like a lot of you, because you're not on landlines, you're not where you might be, so somebody can gather you up. They're doing much better, so I'm not casting necessarily aspersions about people, about pollsters and how they conduct the polls now. They've gotten much better. But the fundamental part of polling that can't be changed, no matter what technique you use, is what? I ask you the question, I'm relying on you to give me the answer. The right answer, the true answer. So that I can then put your answer in a column with other people's and come to some kind of conclusion. Well, if I'm lying, if you're talking today to the 70-year-old man who is not black, who makes $35,000 a year, that's very different from the black woman who is quite young, by the way, and might make $36,000 a year, but that's another story. But you know what I'm saying? That we have different perspectives, those two personalities. This morning I was watching Martin Savage on CNN, and he went back to the places he had gone while covering and talked to some of the people who voted for Trump, and he said to one guy, who identified 2 polls he had been a part of, did you tell the truth? And he said, no, I lied both times. Just flat out told him I just lied both times. He said, why? He said, I just didn't want to talk about it. Didn't want to talk about it. And he said, and I was in a community that was, wouldn't have been ostracized me, for going in the Trump direction. But I just didn't want to talk about it. I felt like that was private business. I didn't have to tell you. So there you go. So we got a problem there. And the polling was, I know you guys should be paying attention to your schoolwork, but you don't know that they had a poll every day. Sometimes they had 4 polls every day. CNN has a poll of polls that they would announce. In our poll of polls, meaning that they had aggregated all of the polls, they would tell you what the poll said. So after a time, I and everybody else heard pretty much the same thing. There is no path for Donald Trump as we're getting now more into the campaign. Here's the electoral college path that politics as usual have told us one must go through. He's got to do this, he's got to do that. He may have a split, opportunity in Maine, some said, but after that, he doesn't have it. He doesn't take these big states, he's out. Doesn't take Florida, he's out. Okay, well that was probably true. But so much of it just said no path, no path, no path. A few people said narrow path. And as we got closer and closer to Election Day, it was really almost a foregone conclusion expressed out loud by journalists. Now I'm talking about journalists, not people in the media. Now, what is one of the first tenets of journalism? Do not be expressing out loud if you are not an opinion journalist, which is a different category. But if you're not an opinion journalist, then what you are telling people is this is what I know from all primary research, the kind of stuff you have to do for your papers. You cannot be saying, but my assessment is, wow, what are we going to do if Donald Trump does not concede on the day of the election, which is how Brian Stelter opened up his show, which is a show about media and reporting on media. He asked the question because it was such a foregone conclusion amongst many in the media that she was going to win, and not only win big. So that polling is bad. That's going to be assessed, reassessed, and assessed some more as we go forward. And I don't know how it changes because people were just locked into it. Now, I read a really interesting piece, because we're all now, we journalists, evaluating ourselves. This is a piece that's for Bill Moyer's site. And it was the folks talked to the CBS Trump team, the people that covered Trump for CBS. And that included a woman named Sopan Deb, a producer, Aiden Farai, and CBS chief correspondent, Major Garrett. And they asked a question. Deb, who covered, wondered how the election might be covered differently without a single poll determining where reporters went and how the candidates were covered. Now let's just pause for a moment. Let's think about the coverage of this election with no polls. So what would you have to do? Would it be better, would it have been a better investment for news organizations to deploy more reporters covering more issues in more places than spending so much money on polls? Major Garrett, a veteran correspondent, asked. By the way, he's with CBS and he's terrific. I think the answer to that is yes, we do overpoll. We saturate the American consciousness with polling data in ways that simply are not useful. Good polling, they noted, is expensive. So we had a journalism outlets spending untold numbers of money on these polls, believing that they were really giving them some information upon which they could then determine, here's where I'll send reporters for further information, instead of first starting with, how do we look at who's going to the Trump rallies, who's around President-elect Trump, these kinds of questions that might have if you didn't have that. As you don't with other stories and the way you would cover other stories, you don't begin with a poll. If you're covering a story about, I don't know, let's say gas prices going up in your local community. You don't start there. You start talking with people about what is the impact of that. And what are gas prices now? Have they ever been lower? Can they go higher? All of those details that you would think about doing as a journalist, or even if you're writing a paper about it, the questions you'd want to have answered. But you wouldn't first start, let's see what people think about gas prices going up in my neighborhood. That doesn't even make any sense if you think about it. And that's all that happened. So the influence of the polls cannot be taken more. I have to speak about taking race for granted and ignoring a lot of race baiting and coded language in this campaign, which happened a lot. And some people just said, well, he doesn't mean it, meaning President-elect Trump in his rhetoric. Or people at the rallies responding, saying, they don't mean it. It's just, we're all very highly charged. No. That's the kind of stuff that really needs to be covered a lot more closely and with a lot more detail and some finesse. And by that, I mean not CNN's panels. Some of those people are really good, don't get me wrong. But when you have several panels of people who are fundamentally disagree with each other and have no intention of listening to the other people, all you get is not much light, you get a lot of heat. So it's very frustrating if you're a listener. And I find myself screaming at the TV, well, what about this, and this? Because you can't hear it, because they're so busy trying to defend their candidate or their position. So that wasn't very helpful, I think, for people to try to suss out some of these issues. I watched Joe Scarborough. Anybody know about that show, Morning Joe? Very much. And this morning he had an interesting take on the headlines of the New York Times, which he says, I'm really angry with him about this, but I have great respect for the writers there and the researchers, versus headlines around the country. I thought this was a fair point. So the New York Times headline had something like, Democrats, students, somebody decry Trump's win, upset about Trump's win, something to that effect. And he said, that's not the point. So this is a headline, according to him, and I think I agree with him, that came from the East Coasters' perspective, the New York perspective. That's their perspective. That's how the headline read. Then he held up other publications which said, seismic shift. That's correct. That's a headline that speaks to what has happened, not how we who here write the paper feel about what's happened. And we're ignoring the other people who obviously voted him in. Then the Wall Street Journal had something about electoral politics may be changed forever. But more to the point of what has happened and not particular groups and how they were impacted. That's something to pay attention to. These stories are meaningful and need to be covered, don't get me wrong. But he said that's the headline for the whole thing about what happened here? I don't think that's the way to look at it. So we have to filter out at every level where our sneaky little biases can come in. Please note, the headline writers are completely separate from the people who write the story, so there is that to be thinking about. We can go on and talk about how other things were covered, the angry white men, the ambitious women. I hope you'll ask me questions about that. And I have a lot to say about voter suppression, which I do not think was covered properly in this campaign and had a lot to do with certain assumptions being made in this campaign. So by now, if you've paid attention, you've heard them say African American vote didn't turn out like it was all our fault, that the vote was depressed. Well, it definitely was depressed in some states because of these really onerous laws that were passed with the specific purpose of keeping certain groups from the polls. Now, you're going to say, boy, that's really kind of an inflammatory statement. No, I'm quoting the people that worked hard to get the legislation in place. That's what they said it was about. I'm quoting the Supreme Court, the 8 people remaining, they don't always agree, who told North Carolina, you have worked with precise intention to go against African American voters, to keep them from the polls. That's from the Supreme Court. That's not me. So that's how intense some of this was. And if you know that North Carolina was a major state, who knows what the impact of that was, that certain folks didn't get to the polls. So there's a lot to be said on all of these issues. Now I got to speak about false equivalency. Have any of you heard that? You've heard it. Anybody else? You, few people. So that's come up a lot during this campaign, and I think it's important. It's come up before we got to the presidential election, but not with as much intensity. And what that means is you're trying to present a balanced view, quote unquote, balanced view of both candidates. So I say Hillary Clinton murdered somebody, but that's just like Donald Trump slapping somebody. No, it's not. That's a false equivalency. I'm making that up from both sides, okay? But what I'm saying is they used examples from each of their pasts and their actions to equate them, to make them equal. If Donald Trump is making the level of statements that he was making that are so misogynistic and racist, that cannot be compared with, and often they would say, and she's just a mean person. Nope. Something else is happening. Now you can say they're both mean. Okay, I'm working with you. You can say a lot of people don't like them. Okay, I'm working with you. But when you start taking other pieces and comparing them, putting them together, this is the whole apples and oranges comparison. It's ridiculous. And there was so much sort of bending over backwards because media had failed to do the job they were supposed to do when they should have checked him, when he was, having the whole landscape to himself for about 6 months because he was available. He was available. And he understands media. He really does. And he figured, hey, if I make myself available, somebody's going to talk to me. So I can get on and say whatever I like, and that's generally what happened. So those are just my basic thoughts about, all of this going on right now and what the media's role in it. I'm not quite sure where any of you are, so I'm going to start taking your questions and we can dive more deeply into it, but these are my concerns. I can say that there's a lot of navel gazing and deep reflection going on in the parts of journalism, and frankly, actually the rest of the media as well, to think about, what have we done? What was our part in putting forth really information that you couldn't use? If the goal is for journalists to put forth information you can use, there was a lot of stuff in there that had no meaning, no substance, and would not have helped you get to a conclusion. Now I have to say, people did some good work. It wasn't all bad. People did some good work when folks finally sort of woke up and realized, wait a minute, we're not really asking him any hard questions. People started asking some questions. Not everybody, but they started playing the role of journalists that they're supposed to play, which is to keep the feet to the fire of folks in government. That is the role of journalists. We are called the fourth estate because the other three are to be checked by us if we are doing the job that we're supposed to do without fear or favor. That's how it's supposed to happen. Yes, ma'am.
So I have a question about Trump's rhetoric about the biased media and the left and everything. And so I agree with everything that you said about how he's gotten so much free media time and everything. So how is that reconciled with his extremely free access to the media and manipulation of the media, while at the same time saying they're biased against him?
Well, when it first started, he wasn't as intense with his critique of the media because, everybody was covering him in the way that he thought he should be covered. So please first understand that journalists are generally considered to be somewhere below, way below used car salesmen. So let's just begin there. So people are very ready to accept any kind of narrative that says those people are awful, they didn't do the job they should have done, they weren't fair. I can tell you that there are many instances of lack of fairness by people who just did a poor job, but weren't necessarily biased. That happens quite a bit. It is why people I know who are not in the business, who are about to be interviewed by somebody, will call me and say, I'm about to be interviewed for something, what do you suggest? And I talk to them about how they should present themselves and whatever, and pay attention, and don't go off just chatting like we're friends. It's not friends, it's a professional exchange. So that's the first thing. So I am with, the problem was sometimes he had a few times where he was right about not being covered properly. But more often than not, it was just his being mad that he didn't even get more free media. And then people would think, oh, well, we messed up and didn't do it right, let's give him some more. So let me give you a good example that and of course he never said this, so this is how he got so much of it. At one point during the campaign, when it was very intense, not the most recent months, but this happened, if he opened his mouth to say, I'm going to open a door, they would set up a live camera and focus on it for hours and cover the whole thing, even after you realize this is not what he said he was going to talk about. When he went to Scotland to open a golf course, he was supposed to talk about Brexit. He opened the golf course live on everybody because he had all the cameras there because they were stupid enough to keep rolling. So I'm saying to people, why can't you take the thing, then determine which parts of it are relevant? Does that not make sense? You don't have to air it. You don't have to do Facebook Live just because he's there. I mean, what is this? This is professional media. Now, Hillary Clinton could go to a children's hospital and save a kid from dying, and you might get 30 seconds. He really knows how to, put something in a place that will control the narrative for 1 or 2 days, and that's really all he needs. If you think about him control little bits that control the story Tuesday and Wednesday, and then that goes away and it comes back Thursday and Friday, it's sort of like eating food that doesn't really fill you up, and you're hungry later, so you keep eating it. That's exactly what he figured out how to do. Now you could say, did he have some assistance by people on the staff? No, really, I believe that was really all him. I was just reading a piece of, a more in-depth piece about the final days of the campaign and how intense he was about exactly how he was represented. To the point that the staff that is hired, the excellent staff that he had hired to do his campaign ads, he would not let any of them be approved unless he had watched all of them and then really personally edited in small ways. I don't like that, stop changing. We're talking about really precise, minute detail. That's how involved he was in media presentation because that's his thing. So you're right, it was a both and. I think sometimes actually anybody who's ever been covered by the media extensively, I'll just go on record saying this, at some point is correct saying they have been not portrayed as it happened. And that either happens because of outright bias or because somebody just didn't do the job they were supposed to. More often than not, it's not doing the job they were supposed to. So, but he would also present scenarios that were just incorrect. So he would complain, you've heard him say, they never want to turn the cameras and show the crowds. You know why? Because it's a pool camera. It's fixed on him. It's not supposed to move. The shots of the crowd have to come from other people who are there with other cameras. That's the rules. He knows those are the rules. So by saying they never want to turn the camera on the crowd, it's just a big lie. But because he knows they can't turn around. Because if they move from there and he says something and they don't have the entire rally, news conference, whatever he's doing, then that's not helping all the other people who fed into the pool. All the networks and other media outlets have fed into one pool and serve each other in a singular fashion. So he would know that and just exploit it. But it would sound better to the crowd to say, look, here's one. So what are the journalists who, by the way, he kept pinned up in the back, what are they going to say? No, hello, no, that's not right. That's not. For me, the thing that was most dangerous was his personal attacks on certain reporters, specifically women reporters. And Katie Tour from NBC took the brunt of that. And that's just dangerous. It's not me saying it again. It was so dangerous that the Secret Service came over to her and said, we think we should escort you to your car because the crowd is getting whipped up by what he's saying. Now he knows full well don't do that. That's some dangerous territory because that put her in jeopardy. You've got a volatile combination of people who really don't like women. Then you have some that are, mad about the media because of just being mad about the media. Some of them probably legitimately concerned about how they've been portrayed. Okay, that's fine. But you don't take it out physically, and that's happened again on this whole trip. A lot of reporters have been physically attacked. So, what are you going to do with a guy who's a mastermind in media? I'll go to the back.
Me?
Yeah.
So it seems like a lot of young voters turn to social media and a lot of the stories that got posted on Facebook, Twitter, things like that. And it seems like those were very, very biased from what I saw. Do you think that affected voting in a certain way? Because those stories seemed a little bit different than what you were seeing on television. Not that wasn't biased, because it was, but.
Well, here's the thing. What we as a nation haven't really come to reconcile is that there is no one place, hear me now, that you can go and get the full story. Legitimately. There is no one place. I don't care how good they are overall. And there are some fine journalism outlets, journalistic outlets. They're going to make an error. Something's going to happen. So what you really have to do is to go to, pick 2 or 3 places that typically are very good at reporting what's going on. The facts, they have the resources, you get that. Now, let's say, all right, well, I got that, but I maybe want to read something else. Okay, internally, figure out for yourself, do I think I fit on the ideological spectrum? And wherever you are on the spectrum, go to the opposite side. So if you come to the table believing these are my beliefs and I feel strongly, this is my perception on what's happening from a factual basis. Now, I'm not talking about somebody's armpit suggestion. I'm talking about you started with a fact and then someone has a different perspective. That's fine. It's helpful for you to go hear what's happening on the other side. Then you get a fuller picture. So what I think happened here is that if you have, and you'll hear media people talking to themselves in a bubble. So if all the East Coast people, and that's where the center of most media is in New York, if they talk to each other and then sent reporters out based on what they understood to be the story, as opposed to let's listen to see what other people are saying and where they're coming from. Again, people will begin with the facts, and you're not doing that enough, then you're sure to get a skewered outlook. So my suggestion to you is that it's not just young people relying, it's not social media per se. It's where does the information come and how broad and deep are the sources on social media. I used to refer to a quote that somebody, I use it in a speech a lot, some young person said, I don't really trust the media, I trust my friends to tell me what's in media that's important. And I said, okay, that works. What if your friends are dumb? I'm just asking. Then what you get is what you get, right? So it's not social media that's bad. It's to be able to cull from it and aggregate based on where the information comes from. So many times we don't ask the question, where does it come from? Have you ever played that game? Sometimes you're looking for something and you just click and you go back and you go back and you go back and you see how many iterations of the same thing, where this came from. That's a little instructive to see how many variations of the same thing can be out there. So if you put yourself in a position that you are being expansive with legitimate, reliable sources, credible sources, that's what I'm talking about, credible sources, then you are in a much better position. So it's not about social media, it's about trying to figure out where it came from. Now let me just say this about credibility. How do you assess credibility? Because that should be your next question. Oh, that's great, let me go find a credible source, but how do I know it's credible? You want to assess who is telling you the information. Who has what the new word now is agency. Who has the authority, the inside to tell you the story? Here's an example. I was once talking on a Catholic college about this very issue, and I said, I could ask Father John, who was the president of the college, about his opinion on fashion. Father John is an intelligent person. He is of the century. He can answer the question intelligently. Nothing wrong with his answer. But I can also ask Beyonce. Of the two, who is the most credible source? So where is your information coming from makes a difference. That's why I go insane on TV when they do not tell you who is speaking. Who are you? I need to know where you got your information. So credible source, a variety of reliable sources and credible sources will bring you the whole story. And social media is fine if you know that. Yes, sir.
How do you feel from a journalistic standpoint about using like the work of Julian Assange and WikiLeaks in stories?
That's a tough one.
And spreading that around.
So what some of my journalism colleagues will say, y'all know who Julian Assange is, right? Everybody on the same page? Okay. Will say, well, it's okay because if you think about some of the major stories that have been based on leaks, you know, from government or whatever, Deep Throat, Watergate, that was a leak. If you think about that, you know, it's all stolen material. Well, yeah, but I gotta say, it's kind of a thin line. I mean, he stole and invaded. I don't know about you, and I keep thinking this now. I'm having the Julian Assange effect. Every time I'm writing the snippy email to my friend about somebody, I'm thinking, what if this gets printed? Oh my God. I mean, I know you think the same thing. So then I just try talking code, you know who I mean, blah, blah, blah. But still, if Julian Assange gets my whole thing, everybody can see it, right? So that's stolen material, and the preference is not to do this. In the same way that there is a lot of looking down on people, on journalists using anonymous sources too much, and even, I used to work at ABC News, there's a huge case that maybe some of you might study in any media classes called Food Lion, where reporters and producers went in and said they just wanted to have a job. It's a grocery store. Have a job as, to work on it. They did not identify themselves as reporters and did undercover filming. Now, they found some gross stuff. We all need to know about it. But the question was, and the court ruled against them, the jury ruled against them about whether in getting the information, they lied to get it. All right? So was there a way to get that information, the jury asked themselves, and said yes, without having to do this? Maybe you have a legitimate employee who's already there, film the nasty stuff. There are many ways around it. So I gotta say, I'm a little uncomfortable. On the other hand, it is pretty interesting to see all the stuff that's been revealed there. And, I don't, so the problem is, I won't ask you the question per se, but if it's out there, I'll probably read it. So I'm just as bad, What can I say? Somebody was back here. Oh, here, yes.
Yeah, so President-elect Trump obviously has thrown many busy fits on social media where school teachers went against him. He's criticized like the New York Times and very respectable sources. Now that he's going to be the president and the media is going to be constantly on him, what do you think happens now? How is he going to come to terms with the fact that he thought they were being tough during the election cycle?
Well, the question is the Donald Trump who was on the campaign trail, who got into a big back and forth, that's about 5 months ago, there was a really nasty exchange with a number of reporters, and one of them said, hey, is this how you're going to act if you should win? And he said, this is exactly how I'm going to act, and I intend to shut out a lot of you. Now, he could do that. He blacklisted some reporters for a long time, and then lifted the blacklist closer to the election. But it's nothing to stop him from doing that. And that won't stop, but what he doesn't understand is that doesn't stop the coverage. You know, probably even as we speak, David Farenthold, I don't know if you know his name, but he's the Washington Post, he has been every day, you know, doing a crowdsourced reporting on all of the monies that Trump spent through the Trump Foundation. And he's turned up a lot of stuff. People have turned in, this is back to your question, so they didn't have to go lie to anybody. People have turned in documentation that they have, information they have, and he's pieced together this whole portrait. I don't think he stops just because he's, you know, now president-elect or president. So I think the people around him would like to be able to tell him, you know, to calm down and to do some other things. This detailed piece I was reading about those last days when he was editing the campaign ads on the plane, you know, his team took away his Twitter account.
Was that confirmed?
Yes,
Okay.
they took away the Twitter account. And they said to him, this was right after FBI Comey's director's letter came out, he wanted to do a whole response and tweet, and they said, listen, we are going to do it a different way this time. And if you follow us, this is going to be more successful than not. So even down to the language that some of them crafted about, we're going to drain the swampland. You hear him say that a lot in the last few days of all of these Washington insiders and elites. And that was crafted by his team. He didn't like the line. They said, say it and read off the teleprompter. And he said, all right. So I don't know if there'll be enough people like that around him, because governance, as many of you know, if you've ever tried to run something, is a whole other thing than campaigning about what you do. And his team, this is a very interesting thing. Let's think about this. When he said, I'm going to go to Washington and I don't owe anybody anything, well, that's pretty close to it. Except he owes one big funder who has very definite opinions about, you know, what the world is and a certain perspective, and that's Robert Mercer. Robert Mercer is his major funder. Robert Mercer funded Breitbart. Robert Mercer has a very particular take on the world at large, and a lot of very conservative folk are not down with his particular take. But Robert Mercer has brought him to the finish line. So do you think he's going to be able to tell Robert Mercer, no, I don't think so. I think you're going to have to listen to what he has to say. On the other hand, they don't know how to run this stuff. So they got to have some people come in there that know how to, you know, go speak to Congress, do these things that have to get done. I don't think, this is my guess, that President-elect Trump is going to be doing a lot of that nitty-gritty work. He doesn't like it. He's not interested in it. So that leaves him kind of a lot of time to tweet if he wanted to, in my opinion. How they handle that, I don't know. My expectation is that a lot of what we saw on the campaign trail will become real in the White House as well. Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am.
I first would like to thank you for coming. I really respect your work. I wanted to shine light upon the blue-collar worker landslide that Donald Trump won, opposed to Hillary Clinton. Many major news media outlets have reported that Clinton basically forgot about the blue-collar vote. And that baffles me, because that's always a vote that a lot of presidential candidates who are running for president kind of want.
Right.
That's about 2/3 of the nation that take up a space. How could she forget about such a vote? Did she expect not to win that vote? Was it just a blind sum? Was it her intent? Like, I just don't understand how she could forget.
Well, yeah, I know some people are using language and forgot. She did not forget. She was quite active in a lot of those communities. But once you've been framed, who you're framing, framed as somebody who was elite, out of touch, and a Washington insider, she had to, and that was underscored by Trump, who is a celebrity insider and a billionaire. So it's fascinating to me that blue-collar workers find what he had to say much more compelling. Now, it could be because of certain issues that he highlighted. That's fair. But I don't know how they look at him and say, this is a guy who gets me getting where he's coming from. Maybe I'm being unfair, and he does get them. I'm not believing that right now. I haven't seen the evidence of that. But whatever, it worked for him in this case. No, she was in all of those communities. She had, Joe Biden out being the surrogate for her. They were, this was language she talked. What is real though is that after, not after the Civil War, that's too far back, but I would say after the Civil Rights Act was passed, there's been a slow drain of white males particularly, and typically blue-collar workers away from the Democratic Party. That was always the base of the Democratic Party. So that's been happening. There was some loss when Al Gore ran. There was a little bit more loss when Obama ran. There are various reasons for that. Joe Biden, who everybody would agree is Mr. Blue-collar representative in terms of understanding the Rust Belt and the heartland, and that's where he comes from, that's what he talks about. And that's what he lived, says there hasn't been enough really peeling back and articulating and speaking right to the issues of those people who felt like they got left behind. Some people, some political analysts, and I have to say this is pretty interesting and I think it's true, she talked about the opioid crisis. He really talked about it. And that's been a fundamental issue in a lot of those communities that's drained away some of their resources on top of loss of jobs and all that. So just how she framed her message, who she was as a person, people just did not accept or believe. What's fascinating to me, and I'd like to have more data about this, is that some of those communities that voted for Obama voted for Trump this time. That's a real disconnect to me. So what is it that they expected from President Obama that didn't happen? Particularly when I look at, facts. He came in with 9% unemployment worse. In African American and other communities of color was higher, 14%. It's 4.9. Now, we can all agree that a lot of those jobs are not the living wages that a Joe Biden or Hillary Clinton, who's fighting for minimum wage increasement, would agree that's not enough, right? But I don't know. People feel as though they're still not seeing the recovery. I don't feel like I've seen the recovery one would like to see, as robust as one would like to see from 2008. But clearly it's going in the right direction. Why she got blamed for that? Well, I do know why she got blamed for that. This is my theory. She got blamed for it because it's she who got blamed for it. I think if her opponent had been a man, some of that might have been mitigated. What we know is that ambitious women, and that's perceived as a woman who actually wants something, not like a grasping one, that's the stereotype, is just not appreciated in this role. Ellen Fitzpatrick, who is an historian, has written a wonderful book tracing the lack of progress from the women, 200 of them, who've tried to run for president. 3 of them she profiles who got close. All 3 in different eras. We're starting from 1700s or 1800s to, you jump now to the 60s, and then the next thing was the 70s or whatever, had the same issues. Ageism. Oh, she's going to be menopausal. We can't have that. She'll be old and tired. Did you hear that this go around? I mean, I couldn't even believe anybody thought that was real, but people did think that was real. Okay, sex scandals. All of those 3 main characters in her, 3 main real people in her book were all dragged down by sex scandals, sometimes by stuff their husbands did. They didn't have anything to do with it. Money raising. Typically that undermined a lot of the women running, which is why Hillary Clinton was unusual in this way, that she had managed to put together a lot of the factors that often, have undermined other serious women, and to get to the point where she could be named the nominee. She is hawkish because women are also thought to be weak, not strong enough to stand up to world leaders. If you read some of the comments back to your social media on some of these stories about her, she's too weak, she can't face world leaders, nobody will respect her, she won't be able to hold up, she's too old and menopausal. I mean, people, it's 2016. Really? Do your classmates think that you can't hold up and do the same? Of course they don't think that. I mean, I hope they don't. Yeah, And so it's just crazy, but it still exists. So that's answering 2 questions. I saw a hand out here somewhere. Yes, back in the back.
Do you think a lack of coverage of the head of the DNC's preference of Hillary and her eventual need to step down? Do you think that
Was there a lack, or what do I think of the lack?
I mean, pretty clear that there was a lack of coverage on that.
I don't
Do you
think they had as much evidence as, again, if we go with what I was saying at the beginning about politics as usual, it sounded kind of crazy. So, and then they didn't have Podesta's emails at that point. Julian Assange hadn't been so friendly to show them. So once they got that to say, okay, something else happened here, and there's some evidence of it. Though I have to say, what we have from John Podesta's emails are just very limited. We don't know what the other people said. We know what showed up in his email. But there was enough there to surmise that there was something going on that probably shouldn't have been going on. As it happens, Debbie Wasserman Schultz was very unpopular in general, even before this happened. So I don't think that Bernie Sanders was wrong in saying, something's funny that's going on, I'm not appreciating it, we're not being treated fairly. And that just didn't get addressed in the way that it should by the journalists, because I don't know that they had much more to go on than dislike of Debbie Wasserman Schultz, which was paramount even before this happened, what Bernie Sanders said, and a little bit of other information. Now, to your point, could they have tried to push further to get some? Could they have done a David Farrell and say, anybody know, crowdsourcing, some information we need to have to sort of put together what's happened here? Is this real or not? What do you know? Who knows what would have turned up? But I think that might have been a story that just got like, that doesn't sound like that could be right. And he's, probably all just upset because he's not going to be the nominee. And, it's clear that she's the reasonable, rational person who should be. Now, the question is, a lot of people are asking is, could he have won? I don't know the answer to that. Because he had a lot of issues as well. Maybe not as much. He did have the intensity, though. That intensity we talked about at the beginning, where people driving and standing and all of that, that motivates people. It does. So how would that have played out to a larger crowd and constituency that he was getting at the time, which was mostly young people and some other folks, not quite as young, but he was going to have to really make some inroads. I think to this young woman's question, because his message was about economics, it was a natural fit to a lot of blue collar workers, but would they have thought him too radical? I mean, he's not a member of either party. Well, and that's what's interesting. Bernie and Donald Trump, not a member of either party. Bernie is a complete independent, aligning himself with the Democratic Party on this go round, and here is Trump aligning himself with the Republican Party, but he wasn't a Republican before. That wasn't where he was going. So it's very unusual in that way. So my answer to you is I don't think they had enough to write more than they wrote about it. Times took it on, but not as intensely probably to everybody's liking or more if they had more resources. Just felt like it wasn't. It just couldn't be right. You? Yeah.
Early on in the Trump candidacy, he's spoken about opening the libel laws against the press.
Oh yes.
And
He's going to do that.
yeah, as someone in the media, how do you feel about that? Is it really unconstitutional, or is it just kind of pushing the line a little bit?
I think it's unconstitutional. He's talking about President-elect Trump's threat or promise to open the libel laws against the media. The way those libel laws are structured right now, you have to have a pretty high bar to meet them. You've got to be, and you have to be someone else. Once he becomes president, yeah, he's a big person, but he has removed himself from the kind of the ability to sue for libel laws because of the position that he has. There are certain public positions that don't allow for that. There are others where people are minding their own business and somebody comes after them inappropriately with just flat out lies, where there is a bar that can be met and they can win that. So let's see, somebody just won, the professor, shoot, I'm just blanking on this. Oh, the professor in the Rolling Stone article. She said she was liable. And I'm thinking when she filed it, that's not going to work. She won. You know the Rolling Stone article, the one that turned out to be false about the rape victim. Well, a professor was quoted or talked about in the article. I don't remember, it's been so long ago. And she sued and said that she had been liable. All right, now, she has a kind of semi-public, private position. She met all the, it's very high bar to prove that it was deliberate. She proved that. Court said, you're right. And, you know, she may or may not get financial compensation for it, but she certainly won the case. But when he becomes president, everybody's going to talk about him. I mean, you know, he'll be filing suit every day, not just from journalists, but that doesn't work. And I think it's unconstitutional, but that's another story. Yes? Or unless you do your hair. Okay, yes, okay.
So I just want to know in general, since you've like been around this field for a while and you have experience and seen previous elections and stuff, what do you think Clinton could have done? Do you think Clinton could have done anything differently? Do you think this was the mood, like the reaction to the first black president and to globalization and things that did this? Do you think that it's because because she was a woman or she's not as charismatic? What do you think?
Well, I think that there was a perfect storm, and the way that I talked about the perfect storm of her being able to become the first serious woman presidential nominee. Well, she was the first nominee who was a woman for president. There was a perfect storm of all that. She had a series of experiences that could not be questioned. Her resume is stellar. If folks don't know, even people who really did not like her when she worked in the Senate could not say anything more about how wonderful she worked across the aisle. And in fact, when her team believed that she was going to win, she had already instructed people to start reaching out across the aisle, because we're not going to have the same kind of paralysis we've had. She wasn't going to allow for that to happen, because she had worked with people who fundamentally disagreed with her, and they had been able to work together. So there was all of that, the perfect storm, the resume, all the right experience, and an extremely unpopular body. So let's put aside the sex right now and just say she was unpopular because she's part of the whole Clinton thing. Bill did not help her, by the way. Bill did not help her. I wanted to just go rip him out of the chair after he went on to Loretta Lynch's plane and she let him. I'm like screaming, are you kidding me? You know, I mean, so Bill didn't help her. You know, he's got a lot of baggage. No, you know, that was the last time everybody's 401k was really quite fat and healthy. Just saying. So she had all of that to deal with, and she comes across, the one thing about Bill Clinton that you guys probably haven't experienced to the fullest is that he is very, very personable and very, very in the moment. That's not her. She as much as said it on the campaign trail. You can't judge me by those standards, but I'm very sincere in what I want to do. I just can't do it. By the way, as I told you, I'm an alum of Wellesley, so I've had occasion to run into and interact with classmates of hers. They are just cannot believe that she is described as cold and unfeeling, because apparently she is the funniest, the most warm, the most caring, all of that off screen. But they said, we watch her change into this other person in public. I'm sure that's a defense mechanism. She's been attacked for 30 years. She's got to be ready. Okay, so you have that as an issue. So that's singularly disliked. But a lot of people didn't like Donald Trump either, for all the reasons we've talked about and more. We didn't get into his business dealings, which have made him singularly unpopular with many people who didn't get paid, and other folks who have operated with him in business that had nothing to do with not getting paid, but just having being screwed over in various ways. So you had the level of unpopularity. This might not be so false equivalent. They were disliked for different reasons. And in the intensity seemed to be the same for different groups. But then she had the female thing. And as I was at Wellesley College that night, the biggest impact as it became clear that she was losing was from the young students and young alums who were having a hard time dealing with, they were coming over to me saying, can it be that people really, really, really feel this strongly about a woman being a leader? How can that be? These are all smart young women. Wellesley's whole mission is to shape women for leadership. That's the goal. That's it. They're very blatant about it. So how could it be? And the older alums were like, told you, this is what we expected. You know, it's So the depth of that cannot be underestimated. And again, when we go back to his mastery of the media, he was able to tap into that a lot. Just tap into it just a little bit. And that gave people plenty of license to then say, she's an ambitious, greedy, hard, stone. You know, some people doing the social media thing had her killing 5 or 6 people. Please, I hope you didn't click on those stories. You know, I mean, it was just, there's no way around that at a certain point. If you begin with the premise that a woman should not be in certain positions and then, you know, you don't like her on top of it. So the question always came up was, some people would say, it's not that I don't want a woman, it's just this woman I don't want to be president. I don't know how they calculate that or how they analyze that. I'm looking to see some deeper analysis because a lot of people just flat out said, I did, or one of my commentaries I did months and months ago, you know, so people are saying that you wouldn't think are saying, I don't feel comfortable. And that's women and men, by the way, just to be clear. And that was the other thing that was found, that Ellen Fitzpatrick found in her book when she looked at the past histories of these women who had run or tried to run for the presidency, is that women were some of their biggest foes in their attempts to run. So that's a lot. So my question is, who's in the pipeline? This is the question that others have asked as well. Who could be in the pipeline that would have the resume, the quote-unquote likability, if we're going to go with that, okay? But also the ambition, because you got to be ambitious to want to go. Who wants that job? I don't. You know, seriously, I don't want to, you know, all that has to be in play. What are the particular characteristics that can come together that might put a woman in play? I have my eye on a woman who just won her first gig, her first Senate gig. I think Kamala Harris from California could be that woman. She's got 6 years to go to the Senate. She hadn't done a thing, I'm just saying, based on what she's done in California. She's extremely attractive. I mean, I'm just putting it out here, people. You know, you got it. Women have to be concerned about that. She's looks like a model. She's smart as a whip. She talks about really tough issues. She's dealt with some really tough issues, and she's not afraid to talk about it. She's black with immigrant parents. Hello! Let's cover many constituencies. I mean, there you go. So I think that she's the one to keep an eye on. I'll give you that assignment. Keep an eye on Kamala Harris. She is now also going into the Senate. Now this is pathetic. This will be the highest number of women ever in the Senate, ever. I think maybe it's going to be 6. I haven't counted them all. It's ridiculous. That's counting a couple people who are already there. But there are women coming in, including Tammy Duckworth, who lost her limbs fighting for this country. How about that as a tough woman who knows, you know, she knows war. She can talk about war. She's fought a very hard campaign to get there. It was a nasty one, almost as nasty as Clinton and Trump. She came out on top, smart as a whip. That's another person to keep an eye on. But they're both 6 years away from any possibility. There's a 4-year time clock going, so maybe they'll get pushed out at 4. I don't know, depending on what they're able to do. Yes, sir, behind you.
Do you think this?
Oh, I'm sorry. They're cutting me off after you. Go ahead.
Do you think this election is going to change the media for the future election?
I think some things are going to necessarily change, but I'm trying to figure out, you know, what. First of all, I think that most of you and most of us, even me and the media, are going to say, I don't want to hear about another poll. Or you're going to have to figure out how to use it judiciously, so I believe you. There's going to be a lot of soul searching about the kind of reporting that used to be done that didn't get done because they put polling instead. So instead of going to, you know, talk to people, I mean, this happens on the local level where people do not know their communities. So if you imagine that people talk to each other all the time and then don't go to these communities where you really spend some time with folks. Now some of it has to do with resources. Journalism has lost a lot. Hey, we gave it away. Y'all are not paying for it. You think it's free on social media, online. No, it comes from somewhere, and you got to pay people to do it. The kind of work that David Fahrenholtz has done, and that's with the assistance of the crowd, is time-consuming, detailed, boring most of the time. I hope all of you saw Spotlight. Let me give a pause here. Did you all see Spotlight? Okay. If you haven't, go see it. You'll see the tediousness of what happens to piece together a story of some impact. And if you missed any of those steps, then you missed the story that the young man in the back was asking me about. How come they didn't figure out that there was some funny stuff going on in the Democratic National Committee? Because they didn't have all those details. Because you got to spend some time with it. That's just the nature of the beast. You got to have people who know how to ask some questions, who aren't afraid of people, who want to be out there with them, who are really interested in people and not just interested in writing a beautiful piece. Now that's going to sound like, well, of course you want a piece that's written beautifully. Of course you do, but I want a well-reported written piece. That's the difference. So that I want a fact-based, well-reported written piece. I want a piece that's written so beautifully it takes my breath away, but it is so fact-based you can't get away from it. And there are stories I can sit here and remember now, written years ago, that had all of that. So it's possible to achieve, but you have to support that. And you all have to demand that I want some real information. Stop giving me this crap. You walk with your feet. You vote with your feet. You know, folk, what does Elizabeth Warren say, nasty women vote? Well, people who are mad at the media vote too. So, you know, make that clear. So I think there will be some kind of necessary changes. I also think the fact that there are different platforms to get information out allow, hopefully, for a more transparent discussion about issues in people's lives, and that you can use yourself to tell your own stories, and then with that help the rest of us understand better. So I think all of that's in play. By the way, well, you're not Gen X, but you're Gen Y, I guess. But the millennials are now the biggest group. They're bigger than the boomers. So I would hope that millennials who are native users of a variety of media platforms, who expect certain kind of immediacy, but at the same time would want some real information, I hope, will demand that. And if you demand it, it has to change. I'll tell you right now, it still works. You write a letter, it's like 10,000 people have written a letter. That's the power of a handwritten letter. I know you don't do that anymore, but an email comes pretty close. So if there's like 5 or 10 of you writing an email saying, you know, I heard this last night, and that is not a fact. What are you going to do about it? I heard my boss this morning saying, I'm on the phone with 5 people thinking that we said so-and-so. No, that matters. So I hope that you would engage at every level. You certainly would engage on the voting, and I hope you would engage in politics at this point. We all need people with some sense, because everybody's going to need help here in these next years. And I hope that you would engage with your journalists. Let them know. When you don't like it and it's not right, you don't have to be Trump to say, you covered me wrong. Thank you. Okay.